Hello and welcome to Choose FI. Today on the show, we have Farnoosh Tarabi, host of the wonderful podcast, So Money, with nearly 1,600 episodes and tens of millions of downloads. And she's the author of the new book, which just came out October 3rd, called A Healthy State of Panic. Follow your fears to build wealth, crush your career, and win at life. At first, honestly, I was a little unsure why a money expert was writing a book on panic and anxiety. But after I started to read it, I quickly realized how important a book this was, and I absolutely devoured it. Farnoosh reframes fear as a superpower and goes about proving that case in 9 powerful chapters, each devoted to a different fear. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. And with that, welcome to Choose FI. Before we get into the episode with Farnoosh, I wanted to read the podcast review of the week. We'd love it if you would give us a 5-star review and then send it in to me. So you can sign up for my newsletter at choosefi.com/subscribe and then just hit reply to any of those emails with a screenshot of your review. And I'm going to read one of those every single week. This one came in from Trevor. Trevor said, I've been an avid listener since the beginning, and I could not be more enthusiastic about Choose FI. The absolute stars of the show, though, have to originally be the charisma of Brad and Jonathan, and more lately, Brad pulling the show by himself. I've seen a lot of podcasts run out of material or devolve into purely a list of interviews that consist of bland questions and answers without really expanding on the material or going to the next level. But I'm here to tell you that Brad has to be one of the most thoughtful and well-researched podcast hosts out there. The last episode, 455 with Nathan Barry, was an absolute masterpiece. At multiple times, Brad paused, reacted to something Nathan said, circled back, and scratched a little deeper, which created one of the most genuine, thoughtful interactions on a podcast show that I've ever heard. My hat's off to Brad, who has created an incredibly deep and nuanced version of financial independence and is the perfect standard bearer for our community. Trevor, thank you so very much for writing that in. Really appreciate the kind words. And with that, Farnoosh, thank you so much for being here. It is really wonderful to see you. And this book is genuinely fantastic. Like I said in the intro, I devoured every word of it. It's wonderful. It was as if it were written for me.
Brad, what? Am I going to cry on Choose FI?
It is a safe place to cry.
Has a guest ever cried on your podcast?
I think we've had one or two, yeah.
Okay, this might be the third. Thank you. That's so nice of you to say, especially coming from you as someone I really admire and respect in the personal finance community. And I think, as you know, you read the book, like it's about money, but it's about so much else. And that was a stretch for me, but also felt really natural and important to go to these other pockets of our lives that money touches, like work and relationships and our mental and emotional well-being. So thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, you bet. And like you said, it is about so much more than money, truly. And that is what your book is about. You have really these 9 chapters with a different fear, and you go through the case for, like I said, why it is a superpower. And I think that's one of the most fascinating parts of the book. I'd love to just start from the top. I think you had a quote from the author of The Anatomy of Anxiety, Dr. Ellen Vora. And she said, it's the tone of modern Western culture, it being anxiety. Yeah. And in her book, she said, sometimes anxiety is your body's way of telling you, please look at this. When you listen closely, this anxiety can point you in the direction of actions you need to take, as well as the unique contributions you are here to make. And that to me really set the tone for the entire book. I'd love to hear your thoughts and why you picked that quote.
Well, Dr. Vora, who was on my podcast, and she wrote, as you said, The Anatomy of Anxiety, she approaches this work, of course, from a clinical standpoint. And she really goes deep with anxiety, which I think is like a close cousin of fear. And I do think that fear has all of those attributes that she describes with anxiety. I think fear is personal to us. And when fear shows up, it's an opportunity to examine what it is about our person that we want to learn or relearn, what it is that we want to protect. Fear usually shows up with a purpose. It is like a lot of other emotions that we experience, sadness, anger, and fear are sometimes bundled as these like bad, negative emotions. Don't waste your time. But I think we're all ready for a new way of approaching these emotions as, hey, these emotions are ours. They show up for a reason. They are valid. And of course, sometimes they can be irrational, and sometimes we shouldn't immediately react to them. But I think they deserve some space because I think, as Dr. Vora was saying, again, it's this internal compass. Your anxiety is like, it's so and maybe we don't want to even accept that, but it's true. Your anxiety shows up for very personal reasons, such as does fear and happiness. I'll go to the other side of the pendulum and say, like, what makes you happy may not make me happy. It's personal. Does it mean that happiness is, irrelevant? No, happiness is all we want. But to be happy, I think we have to also get comfortable in our skin and all that's involved and all that's felt, including fear.
Yeah, I think so many of us feel that we're somehow broken because we have these fears. And like you said, they are ours, they are valid. I think where my mind went immediately is they are human. They're
Yeah.
what makes us human. This is perfectly normal.
You and I would not be here. This podcast would not exist. You, dear listener, would not be here. Sorry to say, had it not been for fear. Thank you, fear. And okay, so maybe we are broken. Who is not broken? Again, we use these words as though they signal weakness, but when you're broken, it just means you've lived life. You've experienced things. Things have affected you. And I think that is all very special and it's the patchwork of who we become. And so to deny your fear is to deny yourself. Show me someone who pretends to be fearless. In other words, they don't care about risk. They do things with sort of this blind optimism. I will show you someone who does not actually know who they are.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting. My mind immediately goes to when you're saying we would not be here, right? This
Right.
podcast would not be here. What you're saying is on a long enough timeline, that would have been excised from the gene pool, obviously, right? Is this absurd risk taking with saber-toothed tigers lurking around whatever bush? It is part and parcel of our humanity. And like you're saying, I kind of said in that very negative sense of so many of us feel we're broken, but it is part of our fundamental humanity. And I reject the word broken, but I think that is where people go without having read a book like this, without having any type of introspection about it. Just, oh, why do I have all these fears? I think
Right.
that's like a common lament.
Yeah. Why do I have these fears? What does it say about me? What does it say about my capabilities, my intelligence? It hits where it hurts, our ego, our sense of self-worth, because so much in our culture, we equate fearlessness with courage, with having courage. And so we deduct that to mean that if we experience fear, well, we're not brave, we're not courageous, we're playing small, we're not being smart, we're not being strategic. I mean, listen, fear, there's an abundance of fear running through our veins. It is accessible to all of us. It shows up all the time. It is like the common denominator, right? Like, have you stepped outside? Are you reading the news? Like, it's a world, a scary place. And so to say that you don't feel fear or that your fears are not valid, I think that is very disingenuous and it's not helpful.
Agreed. And Farnoosh, at the end of the introduction, you did bring this back to money, since obviously you are in the personal finance world and have been for decades now. And you said, understanding our financial trepidations, as with other fundamental fears, can take us on a journey deeper into our motivations, values, and how we protect ourselves financially and energetically. Soon, we're no longer talking about money, we're talking about life and our role in it. And that just jumped off the page to me because I think it is part and parcel of many of these fears, right? Is money, how I guess I look at money is from the other side, right? From the financial independence side is I call it like, it's the lead domino. When you have your money straight, everything else, A, gets easier, but also B, allows you the space to really reflect on what else is going on in your life. When you are living paycheck to paycheck and you're stressed all the time, you simply can't think about these many more important things. But when you have that little bit of space financially, it allows you that time for introspection. And I'm curious, A, your thoughts on that, but B, in the paragraph there, how you think that fear and money tie together so closely.
I'll answer that one first. I think fear and money are like two peas in a pod. I think that if you fear money, you're human. Why? Because when we talk about money, we're talking about high stakes. We're talking about the tool that will help us make life easier, afford us options, afford us healthcare and childcare and rent and all these vitals that we need, not to mention the extra money that can help to design the life that we want, which ultimately can lead to more fulfillment and happiness. So yeah, money's important. And if you're afraid of money, what does that mean? Like to be afraid of money? Because I talk about other sort of emotional fears in the book. Money's not an emotion. Money's just a thing. So when you fear money, I often say it's like your relationship with money. There's something not right there that you want to sort of explore, because when we fear money, we're really fearing the relationship that we have with money. We're fearing all the associations that we place on this thing called money, all of the interpretations too of what money represents, what having money means, what not having money means. And so when we fear money, really, when you distill it, it's different for everybody. It could be like the fear of taking risks, like investing. It could be the fear of talking about money with a loved one because that might feel uncomfortable. It's the fear of never having enough, having too much, which may sound crazy, but there is that fear
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
making too much because maybe you don't feel like you're deserving of that. What will people think when you become quote unquote rich? If that's not something that your family is or your friends are. And so there is this concern and this fear of rejection. The fear of money in the book is central to the book. It's not the whole book, but it's central because it is, like you said, like it connects to all these other fears. When we're talking about the fear of money, it's because there is a rumbling of another fear, which is usually like failure or uncertainty, rejection, all of it, FOMO. So it's very much at the nucleus of all these really, really big, big fears that we have because it is part of life. It's like the spine, it's the backbone to so much of like where life takes us.
Yeah. Yeah. That certainly makes sense. And Farnoosh, I'm curious. So obviously you speak with people far and wide, both inside and outside the world of personal finance, financial independence, clearly, whereas I'm much more in this bubble, this world bubble. And in our little bubble, we're trying to cut through the noise and make talking about money much more acceptable. And again, in this bubble, it seems as if that fear of talking about it is thawing. But I don't truly suspect that's the mainstream. But have you seen any movement in a positive direction over the last 5 or 10 years? Or do you think it's kind of status quo?
I have seen so much improvement on this topic of talking about money. I started in financial journalism. My job was to talk about money. So I did it. And it was difficult to get people to open up about their personal finances, their hopes and dreams, their struggles, even just as a journalist to get sources, to get real people to weigh in, to bring these stories to life about whatever I was writing about, inflation or recession. Fast forward, now we have so many avenues. Social media has completely changed the game where now we have, for the first time in our technological history, these platforms that allow you to get on there right away and share whatever you want. And it's been a journey. Like, I don't think it was like this watershed moment. I think that it started with a few people and then more people got sort of comfortable with the idea, but these like bloggers were the first ones. And then it was like the influencers and all these others who would go on and like share their budgets, their couponing, their debt journey, their starting of the business, all of that being very transparent, creating community. And I think suddenly like money just not only became something that was worthy of talking about, but it was cool and it was aspirational to want for money. That said, there's still a lot of work to be done. I think that depending on how you identify in the world of money, especially like if you're a woman or woman of color, someone who's disabled, someone who's LGBTQ, like you may not see yet the kinds of representation that then would make you feel comfortable to step in and talk about money and feel like this is even something that you can want for, that you can want for financial independence. But we have made so many strides in those ways as well. Like I think the diversity of voices that we are seeing, not just on social media, but also podcasts and video. So the internet has really changed the game, but especially this content era that we are in and this desire to share and desire to have community. It's exciting. And My last book came out 9 years ago, which in the book world is basically 900 years ago. And then I thought I was very much at this forefront. I hadn't even started the podcast yet, but I had a lot of media connections, and the book was called When She Makes More. It really did well, and it's out there. But to publish a book today, it's a whole other set of training wheels for me. I'm forget being on the Today Show is nice and all, but you really want to be on the Choose FI podcast. You really want to be on the podcast because that's what's going to make the moves. And that's where the people are gathering to talk about money, right? It's not these sort of quick, fleeting platforms like segments on television, which is where it was at one point. All that we had, it was columns in magazines and segments on television. That was it. And a few books. Now you can listen to an hour-long podcast about a specific thing about money, and you're not the only one. And there's a community, and I think that's really special.
Yeah, I love how you highlighted these little communities down to the extreme couponers.
Yeah.
Right? That's a perfect example of somebody who's adjacent to the personal finance or financial independence world. But clearly, that's a community of people who are excited about something. They're normalizing talking about money. And like you said, there are hundreds of these type of communities that we're just normalizing some little aspect of talking about money. And I think in an intimate environment like this on a podcast where you really can get to know people, it does make a difference. And it feels like you have a friend in whomever, in Farnoosh, who is now, hey, it's okay to talk about money. And it feels good.
Yeah.
All right, Farnoosh. So, like I said at the top, there are 9 chapters, and we could probably spend 5+ hours talking about every single one with all the notes that I took, but not exactly possible in the confines of a generally 1-hour podcast. Even though this one didn't touch specifically on money, this to me was probably the most personal of the fears, and it was the very first one. It was the fear of rejection. And you had a quote here that I thought was really interesting, and you said, "But when we confuse the fear of rejection with a desire to be liked, we end up living a big fat lie. We say things we don't mean, we lose connections, and in our efforts to avoid rejection, we live out a self-fulfilling prophecy." And man, that last part is you think from just a strategic perspective, oh goodness, anytime you talk about self-fulfilling prophecy, it's you were doing the exact opposite thing of what you're intending, and it's cutting you off at the knees.
Yeah. And I say the biggest thing now you have to fear is that you're rejecting yourself. That is what you're doing, actually. So the rejection never stops. It's actually always there because you're not at peace with this idea of, hey, maybe rejection is there, it's not happening to me, it's happening for me, which means that I need to get out. I need to go find another community or make a new community someplace else. It's not that I have to force this rejection into acceptance. It's not that I have to change who I am. It's not that I have to pretend to be somebody I'm not. Because in doing all of that, you're just self-rejecting the entire time. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So maybe you should just do the easier thing, which maybe not always seems the easiest in the moment. But in reflection, it's oh yeah, I could have just left. Could have just said, okay, thank you. Whenever a friend comes to me and says, we broke up or he was cheating on me or whatever, I'm I know that's terrible and you should break up. But also there's a piece of me that's thankful that happened because this person is showing you who they are and they're doing it early on enough in the relationship, or they're telling you straight up, I'm not into you. So please don't waste your time with me. And it's not about you. It's me, right? We always say that, but it isn't about you. It's about this isn't working. Whatever this is just not working. It takes two. You need to move on. And again, it's hard to accept that in the moment. And it's still hard even now with many years of experience with rejection, but that is the truth. And that is the work that this fear wants us to commit to. It's to take pride in ourselves, that our singularity is enough.
Yeah. And you said in the book, sometimes in life we must trust the rejections.
Yes.
That's exactly that, right?
It's just that, because not everyone's going to like you. You know that, right? Not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to invite you to the thing. Not everyone's going to give you the job. Not everyone's going to promote you. Not everyone's going to give you the money. So what are you going to do? You're going to beg, you're going to pretend, you're going to try, you're going to feel bad about yourself. No, you're going to go, okay, that didn't work, but the world is abundant. And this isn't getting into the woo-woo territory. This is just facts. There are a lot of options in this world. There are a lot of portals in this world, in this universe. And they don't just come arriving at your doorstep. You have to go seek them out.
No, not woo-woo at all. If you're just talking sheer numbers, right? There's
Yeah.
8 billion people, quite literally. So
Exactly.
And you said something also that you never looked at what this fear could teach me to accept me for me. I just thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah. It's hard. I grew up the daughter of Iranian immigrants, and I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts in the 80s, the era that gave us so many terrifying things, I think the Terminator came out that year in that decade. Also, it was the era of missing children on the backs of milk cartons. It was the DARE program at school, and also water beds. Whose idea was that, right?
Oh, goodness.
I went over to a friend's house in the first grade and she had a water bed. And I was like, this is a recipe for disaster. And so I grew up terrified, and fear was always like a sibling to me. I was an only child until I was 11. It was sort of like this silent sibling, and we hung out a lot. We played a lot. So I had a hard time accepting me for me because I'd go to school and I was usually the new girl. We moved a lot. And that was, like you can only imagine. It's tough. It's tough being not only different in a school, but being the new girl and different with a different name, with a different look, with different parents in a community that was pretty homogenous and kind of ignorant, I will say, not well traveled. And the country was not that supportive of Iranians at the time. I mean, it was the 80s. It was the Iran-Contra. It was like the hostage situation. It was bad. Things were bad. Things were heated. So all that was my foray into self-acceptance, which is to say that it was not easy and it was really tough. And I tried so much to reject myself. I wanted to assimilate so much. And of course, it was the child in me that did that. But we take that same framework into adulthood. We think like when rejection shows up and when we fear rejection, we need to assimilate, because maybe in the short term that does pay off, but in the long run, it never works out, rarely.
Right. And it's not being true to yourself. And I think obviously in the book, you had a story about changing your name to fit in.
Many times, Brad.
Yeah.
I wanted to be, it started with Tina. Because Tina was this little girl that I went to kindergarten with who was super styling and popular. And when I moved, every time I would move to a new school or a new town, I felt like it was an opportunity to take on a new persona. And I would usually reflect back on like, who was the most popular girl at the other school? I'm going to be her at the new school. So then I go and I'm Tina, and then I changed schools, and it would never stick. Like I would never stay Tina. It was like a 13-day exercise, because here's the thing about trying to change your name after being called Brad your entire life. And now you're like, I'm going to be Steven. You don't actually respond to Steven because your impulse, your audio impulse is to wait for the Brad signal, not the Steve signal. And so it just got hard. It was, metaphorically hard and actually hard to be someone I wasn't. And yep, I kept trying. My parents gave me the runway too. They were like, listen, we know it's hard. My parents changed their names. They Americanized their names once they became citizens here. My dad, Faroosh, became Adam. My mom, Shada, became Sheila. And when my brother was born 11 years after me, same parents, you're not going to believe what they named him. I think you know because you read the book. They named him Todd. Okay. So it was Adam, Sheila, Todd, and Farnoosh. And I tried Ashley. I tried Nikki. Nothing stuck. And I do think that you become your name. There's this study in the book that I talk about, the Dorian Gray effect, which is the study that like we have perceptions. If you just close your eyes and think of like, what does a Brad look like? You might envision like a tall, dark, and handsome man. If you think of what does a Farnoosh look like, and you don't know me, you've never met a Farnoosh, like where does your mind go? And I think like that's what I was up against in school and in so many social circles, where it's like they didn't know how to place me. They didn't know what to think of me. forget the fact that they couldn't put Iran on a map, but they also like couldn't put my name in any sort of vision, right? Of like, oh, we know a Farnoosh. She was so sweet. There was no precedence for my name, for who I was. And that's terrifying as a kid. I think as an adult, that's kind of exciting. I have friends who love to move to new towns and cities, and they love to take the table for one at the restaurant. And I am that person now. I'm okay in my singleness and
Nice.
in my alone ventures. I'm married, but I love like going to a bar and just having dinner. But when you're a little, it's really, really challenging.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting as you grew up and you went to Penn State. And I actually want to tie two of the fears together here. So this is kind of transitioning out of fear of loneliness actually into FOMO, fear of
Mm-hmm.
missing out, which I think does tie in significantly to money. But
Yes.
let's just kind of bridge this, which is you said in the book you were secure in your loneliness, essentially, at Penn State, or how I read it, by not going to football games when
Yeah.
every single other person, essentially in that part of Pennsylvania, was at that game or watching it.
Right. Yeah. I'm in a school with 50,000 students, one of the biggest college campuses in the world. And I'm lonely. Yeah. Because I didn't connect to the culture right away. I wasn't into football. I wasn't into Greek life. And so at the beginning, it was hard for me to feel connected, which is where the loneliness existed. It was this lacking of feeling a belonging to something bigger than me. But sometimes what I write is that the fear of loneliness is really the signal to get very comfortable in that aloneness with yourself, to find the strength in yourself in that loneliness. It's not what we think sometimes when we fear loneliness, which is that, oh, I should just go find a group of friends immediately. I should just buy tickets to the football games. I should just join the sorority. I should just, do all the things everyone else is doing and go with the flow. And then I will find my people and I will be happy. You can do that, but you need to do something first, which is to get really solid with who you are as a single person, in your independence, really. And what I would do to kind of get there at Penn State, when everybody was at the games on Saturdays and Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, like whatever, the weekend games, the stadium was packed, like 100,000 people. So that meant that the campus was quiet for the first time all week. I could walk down College Avenue and not hit a crowd. I could go into a coffee shop, be the first in line, and sit at a table of my choice. I could sit on the lawn at Old Main and hear nothing, which was actually amazing.
Oh, I bet.
And did me, I would go shopping, I would write in my journal, I'd get ahead on my schoolwork. I did the stuff that I like to do, and I did more of that. And in that loneliness, I got really strong. And it didn't matter to me that I wasn't doing the things everybody else was doing. So I was able to, now we parlay into FOMO, I was better able to like reckon with the FOMO. But I will say I made great friends while I was at Penn State that are still my friends. In particular, one friend, Dustin, who was he himself dealing with his own fears of loneliness for his own reasons, but he too was working on himself. He and I were roommates at one point, and I recognized that there's part of him that he wasn't opening up about, and he would go on long walks. He was very, how shall I say, like accommodating. He never really liked confrontation. And I think because he was just like, so happy to be connected finally with people that he didn't want to create friction because he just really enjoyed the company. And eventually you'll read, I got to learn a lot more about Dustin and what was at the root of his loneliness. And we were such good friends, I think, because we recognized in each other our fears and we recognized we're not alone, actually. But it wasn't a trauma bond. It was really a bond forged around both of our willingness to do the work that it takes to be strong in your loneliness, but also the strength that it takes to reach out and invite people into your life. Because sometimes that's too what scares us. We want to be invited, we want to be on the receiving end of the connection. And sometimes life requires you to do the opposite, right? Life requires you to be the host, invite the people in, which is a little bit more risky sometimes. But that's sort of the gift of the fear of loneliness. It's pushing us to take these really important risks in life.
Yeah, I think that to me is really the common theme throughout the book, right? Is clearly you're setting up these fears that on the face of them seem negative, but almost invariably there is this massive positive that comes out of it. And I think this one particular with loneliness is you eventually got to this point where you were quite secure
Mm-hmm.
in your loneliness at Penn State. And what to me, how I see that is because of that, you were able to find Dustin, who also
Right.
was not going to the football game. So you were much more likely, again, going back to what you said before, being true to yourself, liking me for me.
Right.
You don't have to be fake.
No. Yeah. Imagine a world where you don't have to be fake. It sounds so clear and obvious, perhaps as we say it now, as two successful adults. But I think that, this fear has a way of evolving with us and finding us in maybe some unexpected ways. But to know and to recognize it is really important. And that's why in this book, I wanted to give these fears names, because we tend to just talk about fear as this 4-letter word that starts with F and I want nothing to do with it. It's not this monolith, right? There are several different types of fears that when you can identify, become a lot more easier to interact with. Now you know what to do with the fear, right? Otherwise, if it's just fear as opposed to, oh, the fear of rejection or the fear of exposure or the fear of money, that just feels like you're that much closer to finding a solution.
Right. As opposed to it being just this nebulous fear.
Right.
Right. And yeah, the reason why I guess I tied that fear of loneliness into fear of missing out is I think a lot of people who went to Penn State would have felt FOMO if they couldn't go to the football game.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Brad, I did buy a ticket for the very first game.
Okay.
Everybody in my dorm was going, and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to buy season tickets?" Like, I thought about it, but they were really expensive.
Yeah,
And
I bet.
for someone who's never been to a football game, I was like, I'm choosing not to spend my money on them. Like, maybe I should just buy one ticket, go to one game, and see how I like it. And I did, and I didn't like it, and
Sounds
that was
about
it for me.
right.
I mean, honestly, I'm taking my family to Penn State later this month for a game, but I can count the number of games I've gone to on my hand, and I'm on the alumni board. Like I love this school, but I'm just not. I guess I'm just impatient. I can't sit through sports games. I just can't.
No, I get it. I definitely get it. And you said now what I mostly fear is being pushed into things I don't want to do.
Yeah.
How did you get over FOMO?
I didn't get over it. I think that, like any fear, I would never say that I'm over it, right? But I recognize it and I can see its merits, and I'm going to choose whether to engage or not. But I think that with FOMO, age helps going through life. And I think earning the vote. Sometimes when you're in a group, like a family setting, and you're the only one who does or doesn't want to do something, sometimes you just got to play the game. You got to go with sort of, everybody wants to go to the beach. Let's go to the beach. But recently I have stopped going to the beach because I'm not a beach person, Brad. I've never been a beach person. I'm
I
not
hear
really a
you.
water person, although I'm an Aquarius. I think that's more of a land sign, I've been told.
Okay.
Very earth. I don't know. It's very confusing. But all this to say that with FOMO, there is a bit of like living life and knowing yourself that helps to figure out what your boundaries should be when you do want to engage and when you don't. So the beach, like I just don't. We all decided to go to the shore with my husband's side of the family. I love spending time with them. I'm not into the beach. So I said, you know what? I'm going to hang back. I'll prepare dinner for everybody, do what I want to do. Y'all have a blast at the beach. And I was afraid of resisting this and saying no to my family. But I got over it because I said, I'm 40 years old, but also I'm going to not turn this into like a me versus you thing. I'm going to do what I want to do, but I'm also going to be supportive of you all. Like, I'm going to look forward to hearing about your beach trip when you come back. I will have snacks ready for you on the counter when you get back. And guess what? I'll be a happier person when you get back because I haven't gone to the beach. I'll be cooler to be around. So, like, I want to recognize the benefits too of when you choose to create boundaries. Now, that's a small example, the pool, the beach. But in real life, when the stakes are higher, there was a time when everybody, and still it was like launching an online course. And I felt, oh my gosh, am I really even doing the internet the right way? If I don't have an online course, am I even an expert? Do I even have a following? Am I
Right.
even
Come on, Farnoosh.
all? Yeah, seriously, happens to the best of us. So I went down this course rabbit hole and I was like, this is the worst. I don't want to do this. And I recognize what FOMO usually tries to point us to eventually is that, yeah, there might be something you're feeling like you're missing out on, but it's not necessarily a thing. It's a feeling. You're attracted to this course idea, Farnoosh, because why? Not because you love A/B testing and paying Facebook ads. It's because maybe you want to do something of high impact. You want to create something of value that has a bit of passive income attached to it that is potentially lucrative, that, puts your fork in the ground as far as like, I've figured out the internet and I'm a player in the internet world. And so as I thought about it, I realized, okay, yeah, I kind of like those things still. I don't want to do the course though, but what is my thing? And that's what FOMO wants you to figure out is your thing. Take into account what everyone's doing, sure, but hone in more on the outcome and the experience and the feeling as opposed to like that exact thing. If everyone's going to Greece, that doesn't mean you're going to Greece unless you can afford it. But maybe what it is about that you're seeing online is like, oh, I want to escape. I want to go on an adventure. I haven't been on a honeymoon yet, because I was like, all these things might surface. And that's the thing that you need to address as opposed to like going and doing the cool thing that everyone seems to be doing, going to the same restaurants, the same beaches, the same, etc. And so for me, it wasn't the same old course that everybody was doing, but I decided to do a workshop, which is the antithesis of a course that relies on scale. This was my way of doing the impact thing and the creative thing and the lucrative thing that felt more achievable to me and more me. I love to host. I love to produce. I love to gather. And I don't, frankly, like I don't have millions of followers on TikTok or wherever to like sell to. And I don't want to pay ads. So I'm going to have to rely on my audience. And my audience, I know them. They've been with me for a very long time. What they want most from me is not a course, but it's connection. They want to meet me. They want to come to where I'm hanging out. They want to learn directly from me. And so I created a program around that in various different things like book writing. And then I did media. And then now I'm coaching entrepreneurs on all sorts of things. I call it Farnoosh BTS, which says
Nice.
like, come behind the scenes with how I
Wow,
run my
that's
entire
cool.
business and all my connections. And you need a literary agent? I got a literary agent. So that's like my cohort right now of students. So I'm still teaching like I would be with a course, but I'm doing it my way. And it is virtual, but we also meet in person. So you got to just find your flavor of that FOMO that you want to create for yourself. And so when FOMO shows up, it is a bit of a tap on the shoulder that's like, hey, what's up with you? What do you want? What do you want to feel? Okay, that's cool. Create something that's yours around that.
Yeah. And I love how really it's this, again, yet again, this through line of self knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, it's what do you want? Because I think FOMO is largely about comparison, right? And
Yeah.
even the person who coined the phrase said it's in our DNA to compare ourselves with others. It's so natural. And this should remind people who have listened to Choose a Vibe for a very long time of, hey, what are you looking to get out of your money? Which is, okay, just like you're saying, hey, I hear about this course. I can do this online course. But really, in my heart of hearts, that's not what I'm looking to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So why do I have to be like everybody else?
Yeah. Just examine it. Just examine it. Too often when FOMO shows up, the mistake that we make with this fear is that we run to do the thing everyone else is doing, which can backfire. It's costly. It's not authentic. Sometimes it works out. Again, if you really want to go to Greece and you've got the money, I'm not going to stop you. But when it's higher stake things, it does require reflection. Like if you're feeling FOMO, and look, comparison is not bad. It's not bad to like examine what others are doing and think about, well, what does that mean for me? But you can't stop short. You got to like really go deep with that reflection and figure out like, well, what's going on with me? Because then I think you'll get closer to your truth and your way and how to actually use this fear constructively.
Farnoosh, the next one is fear of exposure. And there are a lot of things in here that really interested me in terms of you not wanting to talk about financial independence to potentially people you were dating, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the most interesting story is when someone asked you in a very public setting, what do you make?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you talk about it because this is really interesting.
Yeah, I was shooketh. Uh,
To your core.
yeah, I think I was at FinCon or Podcast Movement or one of those giant events, and I'm on a stage. And touche, this person asks this question because this breakout session was about negotiating and earning your value and all that important stuff that I really like to talk about. But when it got personal and she wanted to know what I made, I was terrified to answer that question. And it's not because I'm secretive or because I pretend to be who I'm not and I was afraid of being exposed as a fraud or anything like that. Here's what it was the fear of sharing something so personal and important to an audience of respectfully strangers. I know enough, I've worked enough in this space, and I've lived enough to know that not all information is used for you. Sometimes it's used against you. And that's why, for example, in the context of pay, many states ban employers from asking prospective applicants and people who are applying for jobs what their salary history is and what they made in the last job. Because that level of transparency, it's not for their good. It's not for the applicant's good. It can be used against this person to lowball them. And in my own career, I remember trying to negotiate a deal, and the person who was on the other end of the negotiation knew how much I made in the previous contract. And I wanted more because I frankly deserved it. I'd worked hard and I delivered on all accounts, and they wanted me again. So I was valued. And she said this through my representative, my agent. She said, doesn't Farnoosh already make enough? So
What?
as a woman, you have to recognize that the world is not always cheering you on when it comes to how much you make and how much you want to make. And that doesn't mean that you should stop or not ask for things, but it's sort of a distraction and unnecessary. And I went back to that person through my agent and I said, are you sure you want to go on the record for saying that out loud to a woman?
Nice. Good for you.
You know, like,
That's ridiculous.
seriously? Do you want me to? I failed to mention I'm live tweeting this entire negotiation. You are now canceled. So I hear this question posed of me and I'm not willing to share. But I did say, I appreciate the question and I will go there with you one on one. Because when the fear of exposure shows up and you're being asked to reveal something personal about you and you don't feel comfortable, the fear is asking you to read the room. And can you trust everyone in this room? It's your information to share. Some things are sacred, believe it or not, in 2023, in our world of full transparency and in a culture that just insists that we bring our entire selves everywhere, every morsel of every detail of every aspect of our lives. Please TikTok that. No, I'm not. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry.
No, and you
Some
shouldn't be.
things are sacred and information is power. I think I heard that on Succession. Was that on Succession? Information is power.
Yeah. Well, for any of the board gamers out there, you know, you don't want to give up information unnecessarily because it
Right.
truly is power, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting because again, this is yet another thing that is highly, highly personal. I can think of people in our online world who have gained a competitive advantage by talking about how much they make because they think it gives them credibility, right?
Right. Because we value transparency in our culture above all. And I get it. Like, it's important to share. And I said to this person who asked what I made in the audience, I said, we'll go get a coffee after this if you want. And we did. And I invited others. And we're still in conversation around pay because I found value in having that dialogue as well. But I wanted to have it in a place where I felt was safe and where the person across the table, I knew their intention. I knew why they needed this information. And I ultimately came to the conclusion that it was worth going there with this person. And I think that's a calculus it's a quick calculus. It doesn't require months of hemming and hawing. It's just kind of like in the moment when the fear shows up, it's telling you don't reveal right away. Maybe you will reveal eventually, but you need to do some adjusting before that happens.
Yeah, I'm always struck by people who just throw the numbers out. I like you. I don't talk about my net worth or my income publicly. It's just to me, it's really not anybody's business, and
Yeah.
it's a
And that's
distraction.
fair. And it's not because we don't believe in talking about money. Hello, you have a financial podcast. It's just that I believe in pay transparency. I do, especially at the corporate level. Employers should be held accountable for their pay gaps. But when you're an independent entrepreneur, again, I think that in some forums, it's healthy and helpful. And one-on-one, I do it myself. I will text a friend. How much should I charge for this speaking engagement? How much should you get paid? This is how it gets done. That's how it should get done. But to live tweet it or, put it on your blog, that's your choice. And just know that there might be consequences. I don't want to engage in those consequences. And it's my choice not to do that.
Yeah, I love it. Your choice indeed. So, Farnoosh, as we come to a close here, I think actually the best way would be just to quickly talk about fear number 8, which is the fear of endings. And to me, this was really poignant because I'm thinking, well, you talk a lot about the fear of death. And I think there's a quote in there: the fear of death can guide you to appreciate and respect what you have, including your mortality. It can be there quite literally to save your life. And there's lots of exercises I've heard from the Stoic, the memento mori. And I am actually choosing this as a father of basically 2 teenage daughters who the fear of endings. And while when they turn 18, it is not quite literally the end, but I think if any type of look at the amount of time you've spent with your kids, and that's really to a large degree the end. And I think just like the fear of death can guide you to appreciate and respect what you have, I think being aware of those endings makes you appreciate the moment more. And it really causes you to change your behavior. And I've seen this with my daughter who's 15, who wants to talk to me every night, and I'm exhausted. And I'm like, there are probably 1,000 more days like this. And at the end of that 1,000, that likely is never coming back. And that actually causes me to change my behavior in the moment. So I'm kind of obviously tying a bunch of things together here, but that fear of endings chapter I thought was phenomenal. And I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as we come to an end here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think you're playing that fear right. If that fear is for you a reminder of what remains and how to make the most of the time that remains, that's exactly what I think the fear wants you to do. It's what it wants you to protect, right? It doesn't want you to try to prevent the ending from happening. It's not saying to you, don't let your daughter go to college. It's saying, endings are a part of life. And the sooner you can maybe anticipate it, sometimes that is even a gift because you have then the time to, prepare and decide actually how you want it to end more on your terms. But sometimes endings are not of your choosing and they're not expected. And that's sometimes the hardest. Those are the hardest ones, right? They're the ones we grieve the most. And I've had that, I think as we all get older, I feel like that's just part of life. You think about it more. Your life ending, a relationship ending, a job ending. And I think that one of the gifts of the fear of endings is that it's a reminder to us that yes, one thing ends, but sometimes it has to, because it is the only way that a new door can open, a door that perhaps you've been wanting to open, but there was something in the way. And now that this other thing is ended, that this new beginning can start. So for me, I've done a lot of television, and every time I do a TV show, a series, I had a series on CNBC, it's always that anticipation of will they renew it? And it's just this most precious thing that you've done. You've spent all these hours and all this time away from your family, and you've put all your heart and effort and soul into it. And so many stars have to align. It has to be in the right time slot. It has to be loved by the viewers. All these things. And so we didn't get a second season. And I was sad, but also I was like, okay, I'm afraid of sort of how this is going to be interpreted. This ending is going to be this marker of my career. Farnoosh wasn't able to keep it going, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, screw that. The fear of this ending is here to remind me that there are other things that I can actually begin on my own now. That includes growing my family, which honestly was something that I didn't do because of the show, because of all the travel and the stress. I was like, this is no space to bring life into the world. So when this show ended, I was I immediately knew what to do next, which was to start working on growing our family. And we did. The next year, our daughter was born. And I'm so grateful that ending ended when it did, the way that it did, but mostly that I didn't misinterpret the fear as a sign that, I'm not worthy, or that like I wasn't good enough, or I'll never do something great again. But there's always something greater waiting for you. And it sometimes is the thing that you've always wanted to do, but you were too afraid.
Wow. That is the perfect place to end up. Farnoosh, the book, like I said repeatedly, is phenomenal. It's A Healthy State of Panic. It came out this past week on October the 3rd, so people can find it anywhere books are sold. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people to?
I would love you to go to ahealthystateofpanic.com. You can learn where the book is available. Like you said, the podcast So Money 3 times a week. Listen to it wherever you love to listen to podcasts. And I'm on Instagram at Farnoosh Tarabi. I'm hanging out in the DMs. Send me your questions, your reviews. I'd love to hear from you.
Beautiful. Love it. Farnoosh, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brad.